In my last video in the comments, I was discussing with another person about whether or not younger people are complacent and wanting to just be an influencer rather than learning a skill or going to school, getting a job, all that kind of thing. I want to add more to that discussion because I think the history of the internet is kind of interesting. I would say up until about the late 90s, if you wanted to be in TV or in movies, the likelihood of being able to do that was pretty low unless you got really lucky and you lived in like New York and California. It wasn't entirely impossible, just highly improbable. And then the World Wide Web was open to the public. In the early years of the internet, there wasn't really monetization for people that put information out there or had a blog and things like that. However, there were sites like MySpace, and this worked for a lot of bands. It allowed their music to reach a wider audience, so they had a better chance of getting more gigs. Unfortunately, there was also a huge chunk of music and media on MySpace that was lost, but we're not going to talk about that. MySpace is also the place where Dane Cook was able to build an audience. Things like this started to open the door to where people could get more fame. Before discussing YouTube next, I want to briefly mention Vine. You could argue that this was the predecessor to TikTok, but you couldn't really get monetized. Even if you had 1 million followers, it didn't really bring in money, but it did get you fame. Vine was defunct pretty much after that, so many people that were on Vine moved over to YouTube. And if they were someone on Vine that had millions of followers, a good chunk of that audience would also move over to YouTube. In the early days of YouTube, if you had like 40,000 followers and you put up maybe 2 to 3 videos a month, you could survive. You wouldn't be rich, but you would be able to pay your bills for the most part. There are some similarities in the first years of YouTube versus the first years of TikTok. You could go down a whole rabbit trail of different interests and topics. Much like most social media, however, if you fit into these categories, you had a much higher chance of getting a bigger following. Creators that had millions of followers on YouTube made a lot of money each month, and I mean a lot of money. Keep in mind that as people started to become full-time content creators, this wasn't too long after the 2008 recession. A lot of people, especially millennials, were heavily pushed to go to college because that was supposed to be your ticket out of poverty or your guarantee to get a good job. More specifically, they pushed certain STEM fields like computer science or computer engineering. After the 2008 recession, there weren't really any entry-level jobs because those were all taken up by people who already had experience but just needed a job. In the midst of this going on, we're also seeing the rise of content creators who, at least on the surface, appear to not have the stress and the same anxieties that those working full-time were dealing with. There was also Instagram, but I'm just going to focus on YouTube for this. We were now seeing people in real time who were essentially our peers be able to get rich and famous without having to go to New York or California or just hope that they got lucky. That's not to say that the first largest creators on YouTube also weren't lucky because of timing. So if you were someone that worked their butt off through college only to find after graduating that there was hardly any job prospects for you, online content creation was a viable revenue stream. Much like everything else in life, when something is beneficial, one person ruins it for everybody. Personally, I wasn't a fan of PewDiePie. I didn't find him that funny or interesting. I'm pretty sure I wasn't his target audience, considering the majority of them were children and teenagers. A little bit before this happened, YouTube was in the process of trying to make their site more family-friendly. At the time of the first adpocalypse, PewDiePie was the largest content creator on YouTube. He thought it would be funny to make some inappropriate jokes, which honestly weren't even that funny, but whatever. Since a large part of PewDiePie's audience was children and teenagers, this caused a huge problem. A ton of businesses pulled their ads from the site. The reimbursement from AdSense dropped, and this hurt smaller creators the most. Now, if you were one of those smaller creators with like 40,000 followers, you had to put up maybe 10 to 12 videos a month in order to make the same amount you did previously. Let's skip forward a little bit to the fourth adpocalypse. The fourth one you can blame Steven Crowder for. Because of Steven Crowder and those of his ilk, demonetization became the word of the day. This is why a lot of content creators have to use terms like unalive or SA. It's also another reason why some content creators may wait 30 seconds before they mention a serious topic or throw in a curse word because otherwise they'll get demonetized. If you're a smaller content creator on YouTube now, it is extremely difficult to grow your base. The money from AdSense continues to get lower and lower for small creators. Now they have things like channel memberships and Patreon to fill that gap. To bring all this back around, yeah, a lot of younger people may be more inclined to want to be influencers rather than go to school because that's what they see all the time. There's been enough time now, especially for millennials, that we've seen the darker side of what happens when people become influencers. It platforms people that shouldn't have a platform, like Shane Dawson or the Paul brothers. Not to mention the myriad of issues when it comes to family blogging. To a young kid, being a content creator can be appealing. I don't think the allure of being an online influencer is necessarily going to go away per se, but that picturesque idea of what they think it entails is starting to tarnish, especially because of the monetary aspect.